It's a wonderful sunny Saturday morning in sunny southwest Scotland, and I'm here today to take a break from talking all things Lloydie, Witnessy and Carty, but actually talk about my greatest passion in this world, which is music, because of the recent release of this. That there. It's a box set. It's called The Making of 5 Leaves Left by Nick Drake. It's just came out this week. You can get it on vinyl, or as in my case, you can get it on CD. I just want to tell you the story, a short story about me and Nick Drake. Anyway, in the 70s, not 1970, for those of you as old as me, released in 1970, there was a series on TV, I think it was ITV, when we used to only have 3 channels, and it was called UFO. And I loved everything spacey at the time. In fact, I still do. I still, have a big connection between myself and space. Jerry Anderson was the guy who also famously did Thunderbirds. So if anybody my age will know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, UFO came out in 1970. That's that UFO, and the actual commander of I think it's called the Moon Base, or it might be Moon Base Alpha, was the lassie up there. That person up there is Gabriel Drake. That was 1970. How I'd eventually become connected to her via her brother is an intriguing story. So anyway, in about July of 2000, I get a magazine regularly called Uncut. And Uncut magazine always give away a free CD. And in July 2000 there was a free CD called Unconditionally Guaranteed. And on that CD were a load of artists I knew nothing about. One of them was Sandy Denny, and the other one was Nick Drake. I, on the back of that, went and bought, on the back of the track of that, I bought Sandy Denny's album called Listen Listen, which was a compilation album, and a Nick Drake compilation album, which was called A Treasury. And I played Listen Listen and A Treasury for the next few years, till eventually this lovely box set came out called N.R. Drake 69, which is a picture of his, apparently this is a case that he took to school or university. And in here were all his albums, including 5 Leaves Left, and Brighter Later and Pink Moon, and a few compilations after his death. In playing those albums regularly, I can't mind when this came out, but anyways, whenever this came out, 2013. Christ, that's 12 years ago. Anyway, so then I started to realise that my favourite Nick Drake album was an album called Brighter Later, and to this day, Brighter Later is probably, that's the album there, Brighter Later is probably the album I play more than any other album. Not just the file, I mean on Alexa or anything. It was only when this album came out that I finally got to read the credits on the back of here that I realised the connection between Nick, Sandy and Fairport Convention. So, on this album are two, the bass player is a guy called Dave Pegg, and the drummer's called Dave Mattox on this album, because they were on the same record label. And those two chaps were in Fairport Convention. Fairport Convention, the same band that Sandy was on. In fact, if you actually look at Legion Leaf there, On there, that's Dave Mattox, the drummer, and that's Sandy Denny up there. That's of course Richard Thompson, and the guy down there is a guy called Ashley Hutchins. Dave Pegg replaced Ashley Hutchins and also in all subsequent Fairport albums, and he's still the bass player. It was actually Hutchins who discovered Nick Drake. Nick Drake was playing at the Roundhouse along with a guy called, managed to blag his way on a spot that included Country Joe McDonald and Fish. Country Joe McDonald and Fish. Fish was the guitarist, a guy called Barry Melton. Barry Melton, who actually went to see playing in a pub in Kinross in Scotland. Country Joe McDonald and Fish, if you've ever seen the Woodstock film, it's Country Joe McDonald performed solo on that. If you watch the other big film of the day, the other big one at the time, I think it was out the year before, the Monterey Pop Festival. If you ever watched that, Monterey Pop Festival, Country Joe McDonald and Fish play that. Now, ironically, and all coming back to Fairport again, is that if you ever watch the Woodstock film, you'll see Joe Cocker and the Grease Band playing A Little Help With My Friends. The drummer in that performance is this guy here. This is called Bruce Rowland. Bruce Rowland replaced Dave Mattox in Fairport Convention. Everything's come back to Fairport Convention here. So anyway, Nick Drake, he was a solo guitarist. He was playing at the Roundhouse. Ashley Hutchins, who I met last year to sign the album, is the bass player of Fairport. He lets his label owner and producer, an American called Joe Boyd, and say, you need to go and sign this guy up. Joe Boyd gets him signed up, and straight away they start to make 5 Leaves Left. Only recently discovered in the past few years. It was all supposed to be done and dusted on this Nick Drake box set, but they discovered reel-to-reel tapes of Nick Drake going through all the songs prior to recording 5 Leaves Left, and that's on here. Now, you don't have to buy this box set. It is very expensive. It's 65 quid, to be honest with you. But however, it's well worth the investment for me. But if you want to go onto the BBC Sounds app, which you can do through your TV or through your computer, or do it through Alexa or whatever, there's 5 different things about Nick Drake at the moment. One of them is a documentary about the making of 5 Leaves Left. It's well worth doing it. There's another one, an older one, where Brad Pitt, who's a big fan of Nick Drake, talks about Nick Drake's career. There's a Guy Garvey one talking about selecting Nick Drake's tracks. There's Nick Drake at the BBC. So there's at least 5. They're all well worth listening to, but the one you should listen to is the new documentary, the newest one, which has just come up, about the making of 5 Leaves Left. I listened to a few of them back to back last night before I actually play this. Interestingly, the guy here, John Wood, he's the engineer. He's an engineer who has done work on so many albums. Just Google John Wood engineer, you'll see his work done on all albums. He says in the documentary, of all the albums that he's ever done for a whole host of artists, this, Brighter Later, is the album which he listens to and go, that's it. This is perfection. In his eyes and ears, Brighter Later by Nick Drake cannot be beat. There's nothing he'd go back and say, oh, that should be louder, that should be different, that came in too soon, that shouldn't come in at all. This, in his opinion, is the most perfect album he ever was the engineer on. And this regularly features in the top 50 of the greatest albums ever made. And so I can only encourage anybody today, or anybody who's watching this video, if you've not listened to Brighter Later, which is strewn with wonderful strings on it and piano and, you know, brass section, you name it, it's there. It's a fantastic, fantastic album. And once you start playing that, if you get into it, you'll never stop playing Brighter Later. And then I've now gone regressively back to actually appreciating this, because a guy called Robert Kirkby, who was actually Robert Kirkby was the sort of friend of Nick Drake. It was him who arranged all the strings on Brighter Later, but he also did it on Five Leaves Left. And tragically for Nick Drake, when it came to doing his third album, he thought maybe the reason why he wasn't successful, and it wasn't, because literally when these albums came out in his lifetime, this came out in '69, I believe. Tragically, he believed that they never sold. They sold a few thousand, and the problem with Nick Drake was he wouldn't go out like he's supposed to do, go on tour, because he was very shy, and actually promote your album. He did no promotion, and so it never sold. And none of his albums sold. In his own lifetime, he wasn't successful. By the time of doing his last album, he thought that maybe the reason why they weren't selling is because of all the strings on them. So it's just him and his guitar. And if you listen to Nick Drake's guitar playing, he did tunings which people are still trying to figure out how he tuned the guitar. But you just listen to his guitar playing. He's one of the most accomplished guitar players that Britain ever produced. Absolutely incredible. Tragically, Nick got prescribed drugs for his depression that he went down, and he probably didn't know, and his parents certainly didn't know, and his sister didn't know, but basically the drugs he was given, the tablets he was given, were deadly, and he took too many one night, and he never woke up in the morning, and that was in about 1974. And so that was he was only 23 when Nick Drake died. Left us 3 fantastic albums, and sadly 4 years later we lost Sandy Denny as well, due to other reasons. So anyway, that is my just wee video why you should, if you've got 65 quid, buy The Making of Five Leaves Left, or if you have Spotify or Amazon Music, you can actually download them anyway. Just download the album. But I'm just back in here promoting yet again Brighter Later, which is my most played album ever. Definitely now it's surpassed everything else. And I'm just bigging up for Nick Drake. He only got recently rediscovered, a number of years ago, when somebody used one of his songs called Fruit Tree for a car advert, and then people went, oh, who's this guy Nick Drake? And then all of a sudden he became more popular after his death than he ever was when he was in the land of the living, sadly. I'm sure a lot of people now think Nick Drake was a genius, and I'm sure he'd appreciate that, but it's just a shame that he never grew. He wasn't around to see how universally he loved is now. And if I can pass on the love, pass on that people should, this morning, if you haven't done it already, just ask Alexa or Amazon Music to play Brighter Later by Nick Drake. You will not be disappointed, and hopefully from that you might end up going down the rabbit's hole that I've done, where also you go down that rabbit's hole and you go on and on and on, and I've never stopped falling in love. For instance, it's just, I'm going to end on this, the double bass player on Five Leaves Left is a guy called Danny Thompson. Danny Thompson was the double bass player in a band called Pentangle, who I got to see the singer of Pentangle, a lassie called Jackie McShee, last year. Pentangle, and she was married to, Jackie was actually married to the former drummer, is no longer with us, and Jerry Conway. Jerry Conway was the drummer in Fotheringay, which is the band that Sandy Denny formed after she left Fairport, and Jerry Conway eventually became the drummer in Fairport Convention after Dave Mattox left. The connection is unbelievable. It all goes back to Fairport Convention. But anyway, if you haven't listened to Pentangle either, fantastic band, more successful than Fairport ever were, and certainly more successful than Nick Drake. Pentangle, two of the greatest guitarists who we've ever produced are in Pentangle, and Danny Thompson's double bass player, unbelievable. So there you go, there's stuff for there's all the connections, and they go on and on and on. Anyway, I'm going to leave you now and have something to eat. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, the sun's out, I think I'm going to have my lunch out there in the garden. See you later, and please, please, please play brighter, later, more sooner than later. Bye-bye.